Welcome everyone to this episode of Career Nerd Chats. Today we have with us Shaurya Joshi. He's a risk strategy analytics professional working with Wave, which is a financial company headquartered in Canada. Thank you so much, Shaurya, for joining with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Shaurya, you have an amazing experience across different geographies, India, US, Canada. That counts a lot. So what motivated you to pursue a career in analytics?
First of all, thanks again for having me. Let me sort of paint a picture of when I graduated, right? So I graduated school undergrad in 2011. At that point, data analytics wasn't this big buzzword that it's now, right? During my education in the third and fourth year, what I realized was that I really wanted to get into consulting. I had a few friends who sort of were into consulting. So, I always wanted to get into that space. Never really knew too much about data analytics. But after I graduated, I was looking for opportunities. That's when someone told me about this company called Mu Sigma, which is based out of Bangalore. When I dug deeper into it, that's when I realized that, this is a whole new field sort of that's coming up. I am sure that all of us would have read that article that by 2030, millions of data analysts are needed, right? That article has been abused for the longest term. But yeah, so I that's how I sort of got introduced to data analytics. And at that point, I sort of interviewed for Mu Sigma, got through it. So that is how I sort of ventured into the space.
Great. Yeah, I remember my time as well. I mean, when we entered into data analytics, it was not such a buzzword. And gradually over a span of like last 5 years, there's a huge buzz around it. New courses have come up in this, specifically in this domain. So what factors did you consider while you were applying for masters in business analytics?
So honestly, so I was in Mu Sigma for a couple of years, and when you're in that ecosystem, right, you are surrounded by really smart people. Everyone's trying to figure out what to do next. So as and when I was starting to think about what's next in my career, there were three options. One was to sort of continue with Mu Sigma, become an on-site eventually, become a client manager and the works. The other one was sort of do an MBA. And the third one was to do my master's in the US. When I was in the second year, we were doing fairly advanced analytics. We were running regression models and all of these things. But we were essentially consumers of regression models, right? So when the model came out and there was an adjusted R-squared value, I knew how to interpret it. I never really knew what goes behind calculating that, right? And I always wanted to understand that. And I always wanted to increase my technical depth. And then I also was inspired by a lot of folks who came to the US for a couple of months as on-sites and came back to Bangalore. They shared their stories with us. The kind of cool things that were happening, how companies were sort of collaborating with university professors and doing some really cool things in the predictive analytics space. And that's when I decided that I need to take a step back and really build a foundation on which I can build a more solid career. And that's how, I applied to my school here, got through it, and I'm here now.
Great. So what factors did you consider while shortlisting universities?
So honestly, I think one of the most important factors for me was a good balance of the value that I can get from the course and also the fees. University of Cincinnati at that point was one of the top universities in the US offering a business analytics program. It was actually the only university I applied to. And luckily I got through it, and I also got a decent scholarship which covered 30% of the tuition fee. So it really, it worked out for me, honestly. And then I just came here.
Yeah, I think that's a very important factor. While you're applying for masters, keeping a check on the finances and creating a budget on how would you balance for it, etc. That's a very intelligent choice, I would say, to make well in advance and figure out how you're going to finance your higher studies.
Yeah. I mean, I always, I never really wanted to take a loan for $100,000 and stuff like that, right? What I realized, and again, I would give credit to some of the folks that I used to talk to, they used to say that essentially the output of most of these courses is similar. Obviously, the kind of exposure you might get in a Columbia University or a Carnegie Mellon would be significantly greater. But at that point, I sort of backed myself and backed my work that I did at Mu Sigma to sort of take me and bridge that gap. So it worked out.
Great. And then after your master's, how was your work experience different from the work experience that you had before the master's degree?
That's a good question. So after I graduated, what I realized in my master's is that so there are multiple ways to there are different ways that you can go once you do your master's. Right? You could be a hardcore data scientist, or you can be an analyst where you sort of leverage data and analytics, but you build on top of it and go into strategy, right? So if you think of it as a Venn diagram, like on one side it's hardcore analytics, the other side it's strategy. There's a sweet spot in the middle, right? That's what I targeted, and that's what I got. Luckily, in my first job in the US, so I essentially worked as a consultant, as an associate, and then eventually I became a consultant with a company. And we used to work with a lot of pharma and biotech clients. Obviously, the difference between sort of working in India versus the US is here the accountability sort of increases many-fold, right? You are the face of the project. You are responsible for all the questions. You are responsible for all the deadlines. You are responsible for all the presentations and stuff. So it's trial by fire, but I enjoyed that. It's the kind of pressure that sort of shapes you and makes you learn quicker than I think some different roles might.
Yeah, I think you put it really well. And given that you've worked across both on the client side and on as a face of the project, I think you can very well lay out the differences given the work experience that you've had. While pursuing your master's, what factors did you consider before applying for jobs, and did internships play a role in that?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when I came to the US, obviously the first few months were a blur because it took some time to adjust to the surroundings. But once I got my feet set, I obviously did a lot of networking, made sure that I got in touch with old contacts from my Mu Sigma days, made new contacts when a bunch of these companies used to come. The headquarters of dunnhumby at that point in time was in Cincinnati. So we went there, a bunch of folks from there came to our university, so made contacts there. So again, a lot of networking went into it. And by the time I got the job that I eventually got, I had made up my mind that I don't want to get into hardcore data science and hardcore data, like building models and stuff like that. I wanted to get into risk and strategy. And I obviously shortlisted companies based on that. I applied to, McKinsey Analytics, a bunch of these different companies. Obviously, didn't get through, but then eventually ended up where I ended up at, and it's a good experience.
Great. Shaurya, you mentioned about your experience in the master's for a year. In that 1 year, it's hard to do internships and coursework and everything together. So do you want to talk about what kind of project you picked up and eventually how did that help?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question because obviously given the hectic nature of our course, we didn't really get time to do an internship. But in the final quarter, we did what we call sort of an industry collaboration. So I and sort of a team of three others worked with Cintas, and we did a lifetime value projection for them. That was a really, really good experience. It was the first time when we were sort of in the mix of industry here. We used to go to their offices, understand the problem, have regular meetings with them. We sort of formulated the whole process, delivered results, presented it to them. They, adopted our suggestions and made some changes. So it was really our first rodeo into sort of working in an American environment, and I believe that it really enriched the course experience for me.
Great. Yeah, that's an amazing experience, I can imagine. And it's very important to have that real lifetime experience and getting yourself familiar with the culture that you're going to work in. Did your experience with Mu Sigma help in getting a job in US? How important it is to actually have some amount of work experience before applying for masters?
That's a good question. And I have honestly seen successful candidates taking both paths, right? I've seen people who have had no experience, they've come to the US, they've done their masters, and they're excelling right now. I've also seen people who have had experiences and then came here and are also doing well. In my own personal opinion, I feel having a little bit of experience helps, right? Because just if I compare myself with the other people in my group who didn't really have experience, I obviously had a slight edge. So I was able to build better presentations, right? For example, I was able to understand nuances of the data a little more quickly as opposed to the other folks, right? And then eventually when you're giving interviews, right? if you have some experience and if you can talk through that experience, and if that experience is relevant for the company that you're applying towards, it really helps you sort of nail that entry level position. And this is the kind, this thing that I shared with you is a common sort of sentiment that people who have had jobs in India for a couple of years or 3 years and have come to the US to do their masters have.
Yeah, that's a very prominent question and a point of confusion where people, students are in dilemma whether they should right away go for their masters or get some experience before applying for masters. I think this
Yeah.
this really helps.
I think just to add there, there's no harm in just not having experience and coming to do your masters here. You're sort of accelerating your career a little bit by not spending that time in a company when you eventually know you want to come to the US and work. The good thing is, and the good news is that there are a lot of opportunities out there. So I haven't seen anyone not get a job. And if you're good at what you do, and if you know your sort of core subjects, I'm sure people get a job all the time. So not to dissuade someone from what I said.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I believe experience always gives you an edge, but in US, I've seen people with experience are valued a little more.
That's a fair point, because you can talk about some of the things that you did in real life, right? And also to your point on the industry experience and getting to work in the industry, right? Academics is very sort of like the data sets that they teach you on are very catered to teaching, right? So if you plot a regression line, it will go straight, zoom, right? And it'll explain everything. That's not what happens in the real world, right? So if you know the challenges of data that are present in companies, like every company has a lot of data challenges, right? You have to, half the work is making sure that the data is in a usable format. If you know all of those things, and if you've gone through some of those experiences, I think you have a better appreciation of the challenges that the industry might pose, and then you sort of structure your answers accordingly.
Very fair point. I think that's the core difference between not having an experience and having an experience. You really get to the core of the problem and the challenges that you face with the real world data versus the academic data sets that you're working with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's true.
All right, Shaurya, moving ahead, how did you make a transition to risk data science?
So, like I said, right after school, I went into this consulting side where I was working on, strategy, analytics, the works. The only challenge is after, like I did it for 4 years, and then what I realized is that being a consultant has limitations, right? Like you work project to project, and then you work for clients, right? I always wanted to sort of go to the other side and experience the world from that side, right? Like become the client. For some reasons, life took me to California, and then within California, I had this bubble in which most of my friends were in tech. And at that point, coupled with the fact that I wanted to see the other side, I started to evaluate my options. Obviously, if you're in the valley, you want to work in big tech, right? So I wanted that experience. I wanted to understand how a company manages global operations, how a scaled tech stack looks like, right? What is strategy and what is product building in these big tech companies, right? Because all I heard was theoretical, right? I wanted to experience all of this for myself. That is when I decided to apply an interview for these companies. That's when I got someone help me identify this role at Uber in risk. I had no risk experience, right? So obviously I did a lot of research on risk and the payment space before applying. And when I looked at the payment space and I just looked at fintech in general, I really loved it, right? Just because of the usage of fintech all over. And coming from India, you understand how cash can be abused, right? So how fintech can really enable unlock opportunities for a lot of folks, and that really helped me. And Uber's mission in general, like it echoed with me a lot. So I would say that risk was a nice coincidence. I never really looked for risk. Like it was the second thing that happened to me. The first thing that led me to that was sort of this itch to get into a big tech, understand operations at scale, and all of those things that I mentioned. What I brought to Uber and why they hired me was not because of my risk experience, right? Because I had none. What they were looking for was a person who can, essentially look at problems and try to solve them, right? And that my consulting experience really helped in that, right? So like the things that I was mentioning, being at the intersection of analytics and strategy, that is what helped me get into Uber. And the folks trusted me enough to sort of learn the domain. Obviously, there's a sequel round, so you have to clear that. To anyone who's thinking that they need experience, I would just like to tell them that you can bring problem solving as a skill set and learn the domain as and when the time comes.
So generally, when people think about risk management, they only relate it to credit risk companies or core fintech companies. So how was your experience of working in risk with a tech platform like?
Oh, it was fantastic, fantastic. I think Uber is honestly the best thing that has happened to my career till now. And I say this because Uber, from the outside, looks like this huge company, but there's a lot of autonomy when it comes to your role. So, for example, in the first year, like I joined Uber, I think in November 2018, and till November 2019, I was sort of leading risk management for Uber Eats globally, right? So that involved managing all sorts of fraud risk, promotion risk, anything related to a card auth not working, and stuff like that. And not only solving this problem just in the US, but solving it everywhere else in the world. Uber at that time operated in 60, 70 countries, right? So having people in India, having people in Europe, having people in Latin America, having people in Southeast Asia. I mean, just getting to work with such a dynamic group of people was really, really. I think it was fantastic.
Amazing.
Yeah. So and Uber gave me an opportunity to really solve problems at scale, right? It helped me understand the importance of experimentation, the importance of testing, importance of sort of double checking what you do. What can go wrong if you flip something and it isn't properly checked, right? So you learn a lot, and when you're working at that scale, the repercussions are also significant, right? So you develop a mindset of making sure that whatever you do is airtight, and sort of that mindset percolates across the whole system and across your whole team. So just the kind of people you work with, it's
Wow, that looks so fascinating.
it's really I think the whole experience is really gratifying. Because whatever you do, you can see the repercussions of it in real time. So there's fraud happening, a lot of fraud is happening, and then you write a rule to stop it. You can see it immediately dip, right? And that will sort of impact your numbers and your targets and all of those things. The changes that you make to your product, you can see them work in real time, and that's thrilling, but it's also a great responsibility, right? Because you are sort of responsible for a great customer experience as well. How do you manage risk and maintain a great customer experience and see those changes happening in real time, right? So like I said, like awesome experience.
Great, Shaurya. I'm glad that you liked your work with Uber. I'm moving ahead, Shaurya. Like, I think you spent good amount of time in the US and got to work with multiple companies after your graduation as well. How many years did you spend there? And then what factors did you consider before you decided to move to Canada?
I was in the US for, I think, about 8 years. Honestly, loved my experience there. But I just feel that the scope to be available for a variety of opportunities isn't available for an Indian in America. Like, I'll be honest, just because of the visa situation, right? If you want to move a role, that you have to file an H1 amendment for it, and forget about getting a green card anytime before 10 to 15 years, and then you're stuck with an H1B, right? I mean, that whole thing didn't really appeal to me, and I really wanted sort of a stable platform to make sure that I can experiment, and I can try different roles on before sort of settling into a definitive career. And America, unfortunately, doesn't really allow me to do that. In administration, you don't know what can happen. So obviously, my move was predominantly focused on stability, and that's why I sort of moved to Canada. And then obviously I had some personal reasons as well. So it worked out, and the opportunity that I got here at my current company was also really great. It gave me sort of a stepping stone to really move into a much larger role, impact a much larger set of challenges and problems. So I took the leap.
And what was the process like for your movement from US to Canada?
When we were looking for options, I looked at Canada. I think it's called CIC or Canadian Immigration Website or whatever. And then I looked at the cutoff at that point in time, then figured out where my wife and I land. And obviously at that point in time, we were above the cutoff. So yeah, I think the process was pretty straightforward. I didn't use a consultant or anyone like that. Just went through the website, looked at the steps, followed those steps. Obviously, giving an IELTS test, getting a score for it, getting your transcript from India to Canada. I did all of those things. The whole process took about a year or 15, 16 months. And by that time, I had my PR with me. And then we waited for a while, tried to assess our options. Do we want to stay in the US? Do we want to come here? And then coronavirus happened. So obviously it accelerated our timeline because if everyone's working from home, how does it matter? It's a step-by-step process. It's a fairly smooth process. So you do your IELTS, you give your IELTS test, and then you get your transcripts over to Canada. They'll assess it. Then they'll send you an invitation to apply. Invitation to apply is essentially saying upload a bunch of documents, right? So you upload a bunch of documents, whatever you've claimed in your application initially. And once you give all of those documents, the government assesses whether you qualify or not. And then they give an assessment, a final verdict to you in a few months. And once you get that verdict, you're given, I think, a 6-month period to officially land in Canada and make your PR official. So yeah, it wasn't like I cannot recall a significant challenge. It was fairly smooth.
Great. And did you look for the job opportunity that you found in Canada while you were still in US, or did you start looking out for opportunities when you reached Canada?
No, so I started to look for opportunities when I was in the US. So what I knew was that I wanted to remain in tech. So I was looking for similar companies. And the company that I'm at right now, I got to meet the VP here. Her name is Angie. And we connected on LinkedIn. I spoke to her and sort of told her what I'm looking for. At that point in time, she was also looking for someone in a similar role. So as luck would have it, sort of things clicked, and then I interviewed, and then I got through, and then I came to Canada, and then officially started my job.
Great. I'm glad that things worked out, especially in the middle
of
the pandemic.
I fairly lucky, I would say. Yeah.
So how is your experience so far? Do you think the tech job market in Canada is very different from that in US and India?
Yeah, so I think, so as far as India is concerned, honestly, I don't know. I left India a fair while ago, right? And from what I hear is that obviously a lot of these US tech companies have offices there, but India has a very blooming, tech ecosystem in itself. If you talk about Paytm, PhonePe, Zerodha, all of these companies, right? So I'm sure that there are a ton of opportunities in the Indian tech sector as well. What I would be able to do is sort of contrast the US versus Canada because that's more relevant to my experience. And what I would say is that there is no dearth of opportunity in Canada for people who sort of know their job and have a relevant skill set. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the job landscape in Canada, if you look at companies that are ops heavy, right, like Uber, DoorDash, Lyft, all of these companies have offices in Canada. Most of these offices are operations based, because essentially they want to scale their product in this geography. So you will find a lot of strategy and operations roles in companies like this in Canada. But then there's a University of Waterloo here, which has an extremely good computer science program. And it's called the mini Silicon Valley. They call it that. So there are a lot of companies that are actually moving there and setting up offices. So Google has a presence there. Like Google Cloud hires a lot of people. They are hiring here. Amazon is hiring a lot. Walmart has a whole office here which focuses on fulfillment. So does Amazon, right? So if you talk about US tech companies and their presence in Canada, obviously there's a huge presence. And like I said, having the right skill set, I'm sure that there are no dearth of jobs. But then there is also a Canadian tech ecosystem, right? So if you think about companies like Shopify is huge. Simple, Wave, all of these companies are growing tremendously. And there is always a need. Like even if I go to Wave's website right now, I'd find tons of roles for software engineers, for UX designers, for risk analysts, for growth analysts, for IT security folks. So there are quite a few jobs, but obviously let's talk relative scale. So you won't get the same number of jobs that you get in Silicon Valley just because of the population difference, right? So obviously the scale of jobs is less, but again, like I said, most people that I know that have a relevant skill set are all working. If you get your citizenship in around 3.5 years, uh, and once you do that, it's relatively easy to work in the US, right? There's a visa called a TN1 visa, and you actually get it stamped at the border, right? You just go there with an offer letter and they stamp. So there's a lot of cross-country collaboration also happening. Like,
good. Yeah, great to know that.
absolutely. And if you sort of zoom out a little bit, right, and come out of tech, Canada has a booming banking sector. It
Okay.
has a booming telecom sector. And some of these telecom companies are like doing really, really cool stuff uh, in risk and otherwise as well. So as far as the industry and availability of jobs is concerned, it's not just in tech, but overall, I think there's a general impetus, and companies are now also realizing that they have to enter into this new world of tech stacks and building everything at scale and all of those things. So there's no dearth of jobs for people in technical roles.
Great. Thank you, Shaurya. It was amazing to know about your journey so far. And thanks for sharing everything with us so candidly.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me. It was a fantastic experience.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.